Hello everyone, and welcome to another patrons only Tuesday night stream. That's right, 2 in a row in these cold winter months. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. Thank you for watching. Today, we're going to be talking a bit about Hellfinder and one of the more important rules changes that this hack has in store for the Pathfinder game. That's right, today we're going to be talking about stress and trauma. Hey there, folks. Welcome to the chat. Yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about this week. It's a system that I'm currently in the middle of kind of doing some design work on, and figure it would be fun to kind of chat about it, take a look under the hood, see how it's going, see where it's coming together, see where it still needs some work before it gets playtested this coming Friday. So, I'm a big believer in play and iteration as a key to good design. So in some cases I do kind of intentionally wait, not quite to the 11th hour, but pretty close to it, to do some design work just so that I'm close to it when I start playtesting it. It can sometimes be really easy to forget kind of why you designed things the way you did, or what changes you made and how they might impact the game when it's been several months. God knows that's happened to me in the past. So for this system, I'm kind of designing it piecemeal as it comes together, and I'm going to be using it here in the next few days to much to my players' delight, I'm sure, because this is a system that is actually bad for them. It's part of the keys to making Pathfinder a game with better tension. So remember, Hellfinder, if you're unfamiliar with it, is a hack of Pathfinder 2nd Edition. It uses Pathfinder as its core engine, and then changes and alters the game in ways to turn it from a fantasy, high fantasy adventure game into a modern horror game, which has different needs. The first of which is that the players can't feel heroic. That's one of the keys, and that's hard to do. Because Pathfinder as a rules engine is slated in favor of the characters, right? There is a bias towards character math over monster math at the same level. It's easy enough to fix in Hellfinder by just saying, yeah, treat all the characters as one level lower, throw them against higher level monsters, with the understanding that they will lose, right? They should not want to be fighting things. Now, it's also a modern game, so it's set in our world. So, at least on the onset, there aren't monsters and terrible things. Obviously, it's not going to stay that way forever, but at least in the get-go, most of the foes and enemies you might face are humans. They're people. You might fight some animals, some dangerous things that way, but by and large, people are the big threat. So the first thing you got to do is strip away kind of their invulnerability. A couple ways to do that. Ooh, all right, sorry about that. The first way is just to make healing and recovery not as easy. That's simple to do because, again, no magic, no spells and powers that you can use to instantly cure wounds. The other thing is to revise the medicine skill so that it's not as instantaneous either. Easily done. Treat deadly wounds, gets ramped back, doesn't do as much. Is really there just to do triage and first aid. Maybe you get a little hit points back, but not much, right? The best way to heal is with long-term care, and if you're severely wounded, the best way to heal is with surgery and things that are more risky. That's the first way. The second way is to tilt the balance, make the characters less heroic, is to tilt the balance slightly away from them numerically. That's, again, using some slightly different numbers. And the third thing I'm employing is adding a separate track that can lead to debilitation and even death. And that is stress and trauma. The trauma is actually a little different, but stress is more akin to hit points, right? So your character has a stress limit, and as you take stress, You build up towards that limit, and if you hit the maximum, bad things happen. You can suffer any number of breakdowns, but generally speaking, if your stress is in excess of your limit, you are at the very least out of commission in some way, shape, or form. Now, in the wrong situation, that can also very quickly lead to you being killed, right? To, the gang that is assaulting your location. If you go catatonic or you panic and flee out the back, they're just going to gun you down, right? So to that end, stress can function in the same way. Now, trauma is a layer on top of these systems. So trauma lays across both hit points and stress, adding debilitation and long-term effects to both systems. So in Pathfinder, you get hurt, you get healed, you're back to full. Hooray, you continue to function. You're at 1 hit point. You're still just as effective at swinging a sword, just as effective at casting a spell, just as effective as climbing a rock wall as you would be at full hit points, right? There's no penalties associated with the amount of damage you have taken. And while I'm not going to get super granular at like, oh, you're down to 5 left, right? You're in really dire straits. It's nothing quite that extreme. The answer is a simpler system that says there are traumas that can be applied to your character, and these traumas are not as easy to get rid of as, say, just healing some hit points, right? So even if, you manage to get some rest, even if you manage to get out of a stressful situation and lower your stress, some of these traumas might remain, and the traumas are less easy to get rid of, and therefore, over time, they can lead to your character being kind of debilitated. You have penalties floating around from your sprained arm, and you have panic attacks in dark spaces, right? All of a sudden, you're in a situation where, like, you're trying to investigate an old warehouse, and there's someone chasing you through it, and you can either go up and climb up into the rafters and try and escape through the attic door, or you can run through the darkened basement, right? And both those situations are all of a sudden really bad for you, right? Because you got a sprained leg and you're afraid of the dark, so you're not going to be doing well in either situation. Whereas someone without those traumas would be able to just pick and go with whatever works best. So how do these work? Well, first of all, it's important to understand the scales here. So hit points are relatively well known to players. Stress and hit points are going to work on similar scales. So each character, all humans, start with a base of 8 hit points and 8 stress. That's just straight off the board. That's what you get. Now, on top of that, you get some bonus hit points and bonus to your stress limit based on your statistics. So just like in Pathfinder, you get to add your con to your hit points. And I believe you get to add your wisdom to your stress. I'm double checking that now. I could have sworn it was wisdom. I think it was waffling for a little bit between wisdom and charisma. I'm trying to double check it right now. Let's see. Some days you just can't find your files. There we are. Too many things. So, character creation. There it is. So, yeah. So you get to add your wisdom. Now, in addition to that, as we discussed a few weeks back in the look at the Hellfinder character creation process, you also, when you got to the academy, you took a training course. And the training course conditioned you both physically and mentally for the challenges ahead. And as a result, you get more hit points and more added to your stress limit based on your training course. And the way it works is there's 8 points you might get And they either go, you get 2 in each at a minimum, and then there's 4 more that get divvied up between the 2, right? So you might get 2 hit points and 6 stress limit, or you might get 6 stress limit, or 6 hit points and 2 stress limit. You could get 4 and 4. Those are the 3 kind of combinations that exist. They're not that much more granular than that. But as a result, you end up with, somewhere between, usually most characters have somewhere between 10 and at most 16 or 17 in both of these. But on average, most characters end up around 12-ish in both. So we're not talking about huge pools of numbers here, right? These aren't, you don't have a lot of hit points, you don't have a lot of stress. Characters with something akin to 20 hit points at first level are almost impossible. You have to buy certain feat perks to kind of get more stress or more hit points to start with. So, pretty rare. Now, that's kind of how your baseline is. Let's talk about how you get trauma and how bad things happen to you. And this is in the current draft. The current draft is that once you are reduced to half your maximum hit points, or have taken stress equal to or greater than half your stress limit, in both cases, you get a minor trauma when you cross that threshold. So, if you have 12 hit points, the moment you take 6 or more damage, even if it's from a bunch of small hits, the moment you're above 6, you now have a minor trauma. So, automatically, you end up in a situation where, you're in trouble. Now, in addition, if you ever are reduced to 0, if you get knocked out, or if your stress equals your stress limit, you get a major trauma. And traumas come in physical or mental varieties, right? And the minor ones are things that will give you a small penalty that applies to some actions. Whereas a major mental trauma will either give you a big penalty on some actions or a minor penalty on all actions, right? So, for example, a minor trauma might be something like, a minor physical trauma might be something like you sprained your ankle, So you take a penalty of 2 on any check that involves movement. Mostly it's going to be acrobatics or athletics. And you might take a 5-foot penalty to your speed, right? So you move a little slower. But a major trauma is like you broke your arm. One of your arms cannot be used for anything. So you cannot wield 2-handed weapons. If your other hand is full, the other arm can do nothing. It is basically a broke thing at your side. You cannot use it for really anything. And you will take minor or pretty big penalties should you even need to on a small basis. So like if you were, let's say, you were trying to brace something, to pull something over, even using your broken arm for that would give you a huge penalty on the check. Now, as far as mental traumas go, they could be something as small as, you are dealing with some panic that only applies in dark spaces. That might be a minor trauma, and it's not huge. It's just a thing. Whereas a major trauma might be something like you have a psychotic break. You now see all of your allies as enemies, right? Or you now have uncontrollable shakes based on just kind of how mentally scarred you are by the situation that you're in. And as a result, you take a small penalty on everything. You just take a penalty of, 1 or 2 on every roll. So, and some of it could be specific. Like, I think the thing is with these is that there's a list of them. And you can roll randomly, but you also can pick based on the situation. So, for example, the players are fighting a dog, right? A bunch of guard dogs. And one of the characters gets savagely, kind of mauled by the dogs and knocked to 0 hit points. Their major trauma may be that one of their legs is mangled and bleeding, right? So they are continuing to take damage. It needs to be staunched. They are in a life-threatening situation. That is also a major trauma. Some major traumas can lead you further down the road towards suffering and death. But yeah, I mean, it could be something as small as a hand. Like, some of them are pretty minor, and that's the entire point, though. The point of them isn't that they're a big deal, especially when it comes to the minor traumas. Some of those are meant to be kind of small. Like, a broken finger is a minor trauma. It means one of your hands takes a penalty on all actions. That is applicable. You would then take a penalty on all two-handed weapon attacks. You would take a penalty on anything that requires the use of 2 hands. So something like reloading a weapon might take 1 extra action because you got a broken finger on one of your hands and you can't use that hand effectively. There's one other situation in which traumas can be applied, and that's when you take a critical hit or when you make a critical failure. So throughout play, you may be called upon, you might take a critical hit from an attack. That will typically include at least a minor trauma. Critical hits, the guidelines that I have for them currently are when you take the critical hit, it automatically causes a minor trauma unless your end result would put you at less than half your hit points, in which case, instead of gaining 2 minor traumas, you gain a major trauma. So, depends, right? If you have, because you do gain more hit points as you level up, but not many, right? You typically only gain a couple each level instead of a vast pile of them. You're never going to end up with 100 hit points in Hellfinder. That's not how this game works. But you could end with 30. So you could take a critical hit and have it not drop you below half, in which case you just take a minor. But if the critical hit were to drop you below half, but not drop you to 0, it would still be a major. So that's typically how that works. Now, stress you don't take critical hits from stress, but you can make critical failures against stressful events. So throughout play, you will be called on to make saving throws against some stressful events, and if you critically fail, you can get trauma that way as well, following the exact same guidelines. So if you critically fail and you're above, and your end total is less than half your stress limit, it's just a minor stress. But if it's more than that, you will get a major even though you are not unconscious. So in that way, you can end up with a thing that causes, as I mentioned before, the dogs kind of mauling your leg. You might end up with a bleeding wound, which, if you're unconscious already, is bad, but you can't go lower in terms of hit points. But if you do take that from a critical hit, you can find yourself in a situation where now you're bleeding out towards 0 and can end up with multiple major traumas, which is a pretty serious problem. Now, all minors can be upgraded to majors, right? That can happen, but in most cases they don't have a direct correlation. But that's the current state of the design. So, finally, how do you get rid of these things? Once you got them, how do you heal? How do you recover from stress and hit point damage? Well, hit point damage is pretty well known. You use medicine skill and you rest, right? Stress is a little easier to recover, but it is harder to recover in the moment. So once you start taking stress in a situation, it's harder to bleed it off. But once you're out of the stressful situation, it just takes time. So the way it works right now is that you recover stress naturally at a rate of 1 per hour that you are in non-stressful situations. The moment you're in a stressful situation, that time doesn't count anymore. So if you're oh no, we just had a shootout and that added stress to everybody, because just being in combat adds stress to everybody. Taking a physical critical hit adds stress, right? Seeing an ally go down causes stress. So the two stress has a sympathetic relationship to hit point damage. But again, easier to recover from. So you do recover stress at the rate of 1 per hour in non-stressful situations. So you have a firefight, everybody gets some stress. And then the combat is over, but half an hour later, you find a dead body that's been mutilated. That adds more stress to people. Nobody recovers anything. And generally speaking, to recover stress, you need to be in a purely non-stressful situation. So the fight is over. The agents make it back to their hotel room. They order dinner and watch TV and try and forget about the horrible things they've seen that day. Everybody regains stress for the night, right? And generally speaking, by the next morning, everyone will be at full. But if you've taken enough stress, you might not be. But one full day of rest and relaxation, if you take a day off, the stress is all definitely gone. You start the next day with no stress. Now, I see that there is a question. Is there some sort of therapist skill? There is. There's psychiatry. Psychiatry is a skill in Hellfinder. It's an important thing for agents. It is often used to, one of its things is like profiling a criminal and stuff. That's a use of psychiatry, is understanding the criminal mind, because you're an agent who works for the federal government. But there are some special actions that the psychiatry skill offers, just like how the medicine skill offers. And one is just called Find Calm. And that's a thing you can do quickly. You can, help somebody center themselves and relieve a little bit of stress in the middle of a fight. But that's it. That's the only way to really relieve someone's stress almost instantaneously. I'll put an asterisk on that because there are a few other ways, but they're more dangerous. So that's the Find Calm action. There's also an activity which is called Just Treat Stress, which is basically, you make sure to remove all the distractions from a person, you tend to them and care to them and make sure that their stress goes away. They can recover stress more quickly in that situation. So if you have a psychiatrist on your team, somebody who's trained in psychiatry, after a fight, they can make sure folks are ready to go faster than if you otherwise wouldn't. They might need a whole night to recover their stress, whereas with someone trained in psychiatry, they might only need a few hours in the afternoon, allowing them to do something else that night. So that's how you regain stress and hit points. But going back up over the threshold, the various thresholds, doesn't mean you recover the traumas. The traumas don't necessarily just fall off the moment you're healed. So traumas are recovered in different ways. So, and it's really important to differentiate a minor trauma versus a major trauma. Most minor traumas can be cured by a night's rest. Just getting healed, getting whatever treatment you need, and then sleeping it off. The next day, the minor trauma is usually going to be gone. Now, there are some traumas that can be cured faster based on skills, equipment, or facilities. So let's say you get, kind of a bad laceration and it's a bleeding wound. That can be treated faster. You don't have to wait the night to treat a laceration. As a matter of fact, you probably shouldn't. First aid can get it to stop bleeding, but only temporarily. And then, getting, basically surgery, getting stitches put in, is the way to permanently heal that trauma. Now, of course, there aren't specific rules for every instance of this, but you could see yourself in a place that's like, yeah, but over the next 2 days, you really can't push it too much with that. If you suffer another trauma to that limb, all those stitches are going to come out, and that trauma's going to come back. Now, that's minor traumas, and a big laceration probably isn't a minor trauma, to be fair. Major traumas take time. They can take days, weeks, or even months. They are things you might have to live with for a long period of time on your character, at least for the rest of the adventure. So this is a really important aspect of how the Hellfinder system works, because those penalties make it clear to your characters that you have to play cautious. Getting in fights all the time is not the answer. You really do not want to be drawing guns, with the biker gang and getting into a shootout, because not only, even if you prevail, even if you manage to gun them all down, there's a decent chance many in your party are going to end up with long-term traumas, either mentally or physically, that you're going to have to carry with you for a significant portion of the rest of the adventure. That might hinder your chances in the next thing. By the end of it, you can be such a pile of stress and traumas that you can't succeed. You literally are penalized on almost every roll. And, all of your chances, which started out so promising, are now being ruined by the fact that your agent has a broken arm, is terrified of insects and creepy crawlies in dark spaces due to a bad experience in an attic, and also has some sort of lingering voice lurking in the back of their head telling them awful things. Now, the thing that's tricky with this, to bring it all around, is I do want to be very sensitive and very understanding to the fact that folks do have traumas in their real life, right? People have long-standing injuries, people have mental conditions. I don't want to ever be seen as playing light with the troubles and challenges that people face in their everyday lives, right? I think I want to be clear on that. There's the Hellfinder is going to contain a warning about that says, hey, I fully recognize that these are things that people deal with on a regular basis. I have friends and loved ones who deal with serious, mental conditions, that deal with physical ailments, that deal with challenges to their everyday life. And for them, it's not a game, it's life. So making the differentiation that says, hey, I understand that people who don't have their eyesight, don't take the kind of penalties that we would associate with these sorts of things in game. We struggled with this on Pathfinder as well. But the thing that I convinced folks to understand was that I'm not saying that people who live without vision, without sight, take these penalties all the time. That's not what I'm implying. I'm implying that sighted people who suddenly become unsighted have not adjusted, do not have the tools to cope, do not understand how to do these sorts of things, and hence take penalties. Likewise, people who have not spent a life dealing with mental illness or physical disabilities probably do not suffer in the way that these characters can suffer by having these things thrust upon them suddenly and sometimes violently. These conditions are not the same, and nor are they meant to be representative of the experiences of people who have had these things thrust on them quite suddenly. What it is trying to do is say that, life comes with consequences that aren't just numbers. And for a game to have the right kind of texture of to kind of convey that horror spirit, the hero that survives at the end comes out bloodied, battered, and never quite the same. That's part of the storytelling arc there. So finding a way to represent that in the game has to be done with delicacy. And there's a reason why, other games, instead of stress, you think of Call of Cthulhu and it uses just sanity. It's a raw number that says either you're sane or you're not. And I understand that term is fraught, which is why I've went with stress, right? Because in truth, for these characters, the real danger isn't their mental stability over months and years, although that can be a factor. It's more about how much stress are they under and what stress can do to you. I think everybody has known someone who's been in a situation that's so stressful that they don't make the right decision. They don't act in a way that's in accordance with their best interests, and oftentimes they can act in ways that other people find puzzling, almost bizarre, because it's not who they are. They've just been forced into a situation where they're making rash and making choices that they wouldn't otherwise make. So, where does that leave us? The system itself is kind of sketched out. The one thing I still need to do is kind of flesh out all of my traumas. I am still playing around with some of that. And may do a little bit of it here, just because we got some time. So I'm going to start a list of mental traumas. And a list of physical traumas. In addition, I've got a bunch in a different document in the first draft of this system, but they're not in this one. So I'm just going to play around with some ideas here. So physical traumas are almost kind of easy, right? It's, you know, sprained limb. Well, leg slash arm are really kind of the big ones. Actually, leg, arm, or back. Back is the worst. Having a sprained back, there's nothing worse than that. Broken hand slash foot versus broken leg slash arm. Those are much bigger deals. Physical traumas might also be things like concussion. And honestly, just watch a football game and you'll get half these, right? You know, sprains, concussion, pulled, you know, groin. Now I'm just thinking of football injuries. I was watching football the other day. Concussion, broken legs, lacerations, manglings. That's the worst. You don't want to get a mangling. Plenty of stuff here. I'm trying to think of what it means to have deep tissue wounds. Not just bruises. I mean, bruise is a simple one. But I'm thinking more of contusion? Is that? What's the difference between... Contusion is just a bruise. Blunt trauma. It's not a bad one. I should also consider the various physical types. So, blunt trauma, piercing wound, bleeding wound. Oh yeah, pinched nerve. That's a good one. I'm of course going to list blind, deaf, and... I'm going to call it dazzled, but... it's a vision problem. And I'm not thinking of specifically just like you're seeing stars, but people, I mean, it's a factor of being concussion. Like, you know, when you get your bell rung, your vision might go bad for a bit. Piercing wound, I think, might just be something like organ damage. Like, that is the biggest danger with, like, blunt trauma just crushes stuff from the outside. But piercing, like organ damage, you really don't want to take that. That's what you get from being shot. So, yeah. Things you do not want. Of course, there's things like burned, electrified. I'm trying to think of all. Frost, bite. Burned counts for both acid and fire because it's just tissue destruction. Certainly counts. So some of these are there just to be the obvious kind of like, yep, this is what happened to you. You failed a saving throw against a flamethrower. Congrats, you've been burned very badly. You know, and we'll deal with that trauma until you can get healing, which will take a very long time without a surgical procedure first and things like that. Let me do some mental traumas here. I'll take a break on the physical ones here for just a sec. So, phobia. Panic attack. Confusion. Mania. Really nasty paper cut like injury. Just like boy, I'm trying to describe how to describe, just like minor irritant. Put it in there like that. I like that idea. Oh, vertigo. Oh, that's a great one. Yeah. Catatonia. That's obviously a major. Just general fear. Shakes. Just get the shakes. I've had that happen to me before. Mostly around spiders. What other sorts of mental troubles? I don't want to necessarily, you know, hallucinations. Ooh, memory loss. That's a fun one. I'm going to call personality shift a major one, right? It just, I've seen that happen to people who had some trauma happen to them, and afterwards they just were not the same person. They didn't like the same things. They didn't like the same activities. They just, mental fog, cognitive dysfunction. Decision paralysis. Distraction or slowed reactions. Let's see. Delirium. Boy, PTSD is a tough one. I'm not sure I can include that. That's a tough one to model in a way that is sensitive to people's real world traumas. Anxiety. Yeah, some of these get into, I've pulled up a list of kind of ones that are just like, oh yeah, But some of these are pretty tough, just because I think some of them are really long term and aren't necessarily something I want to say, yep, you fought a bunch of bikers in a barn and now you have PTSD, or you picked up a substance abuse, right? Yeah, I think I'd be more interested in, like, I think for some of these, I'm more interested in modeling smaller specific symptoms as something you can pick up temporarily and then drop, and staying away from the ones that come with. I mean, I think the line here has to be things that people have developed over time or that are incredibly difficult to get rid of, or things that you in some cases cannot get rid of, right? I mean, I think that for physical trauma, that's pretty obvious, right? You lost a leg, you can get a prosthetic and stuff that, over time will restore you to kind of most of the mobility you had before, but that's not a thing you just sleep it off, champ. You know and getting a long-term substance abuse problem or PTSD or an eating disorder isn't necessarily something that comes from acute, sudden, stress related events. But saying, yeah, you're having hallucinations, or you're dealing with anxiety, or sudden shock of just kind of delirium, you're out of it. I think that's a bit easier to deal with, Oh yeah, I just calling them nightmares, right? Sleep disorder. I mean, to that extent, insomnia certainly fits the bill. So for some of these, I'm kind of going in and marking them as we go, giving them like a flag that's like, yeah, probably not that. Because I do think that the line to walk here is it something that we could say, hey, you're a norm, quote, normal, that's not a thing. But, you're a neurotypical person experiencing some pretty messed up stuff. What can you suddenly be dealing with? Versus what things are that it would be inappropriate to model in this way, right? Or, to represent in a game. I honestly think the sheer number of folks suffering PTSD, and frankly, the way that people end up with PTSD, is usually one truly shocking or terrifying situation that they had to endure, or a long period of just trauma after trauma after trauma. Doesn't really make sense for this. Now, could you argue that, yeah, maybe after the end of the adventure, some of these people have PTSD after they've gone through all the things they've gone through? Probably, but that's beyond the scope of the campaign at that point, and is something more for a coda that says, yeah, that they struggled for years remembering these things. Whereas, being like, haha, you fought a dog, now you have an eating disorder, right? That doesn't make sense to me. Especially not in a system that may be random. Heightened sensitivity. Ooh, that's a good one. Concentration problems. Shifting moods. Yeah, I mean, my brother was bit pretty bad by a dog in his face when he was a kid, and he hated dogs for a long time, even though we had one. He wasn't very comfortable around dogs, and our dog was, the sweetest, cuddliest thing ever, despite being a German Shepherd. But oh yeah, Did I get paranoia on here? No, I don't think I did. Paranoia is perfect. Especially for you know, what they're about to face. Paranoia makes a lot of sense. Now, I will say that there's some expansions to the system that I think will come later. But for based on the way the story unfolds and expands, but for right now, this stuff is probably good. So there we are, folks. I think we're at about time. I've got another stream starting here in just a bit that I'm sure many of you are super excited about. This has been very productive. I'm glad I could talk through it and make some decisions about some things and work on the list. I'm guessing that this easily just doubled the number of traumas that I had floating around, ready to flesh out and build into a more robust system. So, yeah, really fun, folks. This was great. For those of you watching this in replay, you know, feel free to throw more comments into the video. They're always welcome. We're getting close to the end of the year here. I think over the holiday break, I am going to be working to retool some aspects of the Patreon, change some things around, and get things ready for the new year. That may not be done in time for January 1st. I'd like it to be. But we'll see. We'll see what I can pull off over those coming weeks. I got a lot of things. I'm piling a lot of things onto those 2 weeks. You know, some household stuff, some obviously some writing and prep stuff, and just some relaxation. So we'll see what I get done. But you know, rest assured, we're going to keep on keeping on. So thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you for hanging out here tonight. This has been a lot of fun. We will see all of you at the next stream starting here in just a few minutes. Thanks for watching, everybody. Thank you for your continued support, and we will see you next time.